Hi, this is Tanya Blomqvist, and I've recorded my presentation on strong women and gender diversity in the workplace. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm glad to get a second chance, hopefully without audio and technical issues. I feel this is an important topic as part of diversity in general, social justice, and understanding it helps us become more sensitive employees, team leaders, managers, and people. So let's get started. The agenda is as follows. We're breaking it down by Sweden and the Swedish perspective to begin with. Then we look at strong women. We have a bit of a case study on the strongest of all Swedish women, Pippi Longstocking. And finally, sexual orientation and gender diversity in the workplace, because understanding leads to empathy. A little bit about me. I'm employed at Capgemini, where I've been since 2007, so that's 12 years now. Before that, I was a freelancer in IT. I studied business systems, focusing on ERP implementation, which I graduated from at the end of last century. Haha. So from the year 2000, I started working with an SAP partner and in Melbourne and moved from there. Life is an adventure, I've said here, and you can see my movement from Melbourne. I was seconded out to Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and had projects in India and Hong Kong and Singapore and Malaysia, which was really interesting part of my life. And then I took a job offer in Munich and also was traveling a lot around there. And then I decided to become a freelancer for a little while, based out of Sweden. And yeah, I actually forgot to put in England there, but I've been to the US on a project and London and around the place, basically. So that's a little map. And what else? Oh, I'm on the board of our union club in Sweden, and I'm an ancillary board member. I'm also the treasurer for a not-for-profit organisation called Little Echoes. We are advocates for children with diagnoses, neurotypical usually, and in Sweden for English speakers and their families. So that's a bit about me. As you may have read from my dossier, I'm Australian from the beginning, and that means that I come to Sweden as an outsider, and that I believe gives me special insight, especially having travelled and worked in many different countries. Just to put this in perspective, global IT service industry, this is just a graph to show how it's growing and how it's divided. We have IT services, data center systems, enterprise software, communication services, device. I'm just trying to read what this means. How to summarize. Well, I think the bottom line is that the world is getting smaller. There's, due to globalization, a lot more cross-cultural interaction and via Skype or however be it. And there's a need to work together and understand different cultures and different people. So I think Sweden has always been a bit of a world leader. It really punches its weight above its weight as a country. It's funny because it's a tiny country, well, 10 million, but it's still really well known for quality. I mean, aside from the usual things like ABBA and IKEA, Volvo, which is now Chinese, it's a really interesting case study about overcoming adversity. I think about 100 years ago or more, it was actually a very harsh place to live in. And then basically everyone got together and decided we want to make a fair and just and equitable place to live, country. So hence the Swedish model was born in about the 1950s. And I have added in a clip here to a link to a YouTube clip called Like a Swede. And it's an ad by the Swedish government which shows what it's like to live in Sweden with great benefits such as 6 weeks holidays, and it promotes a Swedish way of living. I personally think it misses the mark a little, but it's humorous and it's won a bunch of awards, and so I think it's still worth a watch. So if you want to just click on this link up here, I won't run it in my video because it will take up a lot of bandwidth. Otherwise, you can Google or search on YouTube for Like a Swede. I'd be interested to hear or anything. I'd be interested to hear on your reflections. Also, if you're interested in the Swedish model, I've also got a report here that gives the history of it, the history of how the model was made and where it comes from and what it's based on. And so basically, from both of these media, the clip and the report, we can see that Sweden is a very equitable place to live, and there are a bunch of benefits available to everyone working in Sweden, and the model is underpinned by the fact that everyone contributes. And interestingly, or I guess the video I stopped playing at around the 2-minute 43-second mark when I was showing it live, and it was just right after the guy that was a bit jealous of the main character here sitting on the sofa. The downtrodden guy was commenting that the Swedes must have built up their society in a different way, which is basically the gist of it. All Swedes live with these great benefits. It's built into a system of mutual respect and hard work. And it was formally made by consensus in the 1950s. And yeah, you can Google or read up the social political foundations of this system. Okay, so Sweden, according to Hofstede, well, I'll just start in general. Power distance is a measure of how equal societies are, and it expresses the attitude of the culture towards these inequalities among us. It's defined as the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organisations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. Sweden scores low on this dimension, which means that the following characterises the Swedish style: being independent, hierarchy for convenience only. So I think, yeah, all companies need to have some kind of hierarchical structure for tax reporting purposes, but it also means, this low score means that there's equal rights. Our superiors are accessible. We have a leader with a coaching style, and management facilitates and empowers. So it's the carrot rather than the stick approach. Power is decentralized and managers count on the experience of their team members. I have a funny vignette story to share of once when our CEO at Capgemini was attending a meeting, just troubleshooting a regular problem, and well, actually, he wasn't the CEO, he was a partner, but quite high up. And I just noticed that the technicians in the Skype call who were sitting offshore were a lot less forthcoming than usual. Like, they basically didn't speak. And I think they were quite nervous. And I can understand also because they didn't know who this guy was and why someone with such a high level in the company was on the call. And it was basically because it was summer and there was no one else around, and this guy had the competence within that area. So he just hopped in and took over, or, well, for that, replace somebody else who was away. And I think that was an interesting experience, just from a hierarchy point of view. Okay, I'll try to get through this quickly because I know you've been introduced to Hofstede, so I probably don't need to go through what they all mean. But so individualism, Sweden is high on individualism, and it's the degree of interdependence society maintains among its members. So is a person's self-image defined in terms of I or we? And Sweden scores high, which means there's a high preference for a loosely knit social framework in which individuals are expected to take care of themselves and their maybe immediate families only. In individualist societies, offence causes guilt and a loss of self-esteem. The employer-employee relationship is a contract based on mutual advantage. Hiring and promotion decisions are supposed to be on merit only, and management is the management of individuals. But I think the first point about being able to look after yourself stands true. For better or for worse, people are very independent here. Okay, and then on the next score, masculinity, Sweden scored very low. So a high score in masculinity indicates that the society will be driven by competition, achievement, and success. These are apparently traditional masculine values, with success being defined by the winner, the best in field, and a value system that starts in school and continues throughout organisational life. So a low score on this dimension means that the dominant value in society is caring for others and the quality of life. Feminine society is one where the quality of life is a sign of success, and standing out from the crowd is not as admirable. The fundamental issue here is what motivates people: wanting to be the best, masculine, or liking what you do, feminine. Sweden scores 5 on this dimension and is therefore a feminine society. And in feminine countries, it's important to keep the work-life balance and make sure that everyone is included and that it's equitable. An effective manager supports his or her people, and decision-making is achieved through involvement. Managers strive for consensus, and people value equality, solidarity, and quality in their working lives. there's a lot more consensus, which also comes back to this first value of power distance, or low power distance, low hierarchy. It's a very consensualized workplace in general in Sweden, which means that everyone is heard. Uncertainty avoidance first of all, it has to do with the way that a society deals with the fact that the future cannot be known. Should we try to control it, or should we just let it happen? This ambiguity brings with it anxiety, and different cultures have learnt to deal with this anxiety in different ways. The extent to which members of a culture feel threatened or by ambiguous or unknown situations and have created beliefs and institutions around this is reflected in this score. So Sweden has a low preference for avoiding uncertainty. I actually don't agree with that, but I actually feel it's quite, in many ways, orderly. And like, for example, the buses come exactly on time, on the minute. The transport system is regulated because of the harsh weather conditions where it can snow and it's a life or death situation, being stuck outside or with the harsh elements. I think they've built up a lot of ways to buffer around that. So I personally disagree that it's low, but anyway. Schedules are flexible. I'm just reading off these notes where it explains it in different ways. Schedules are flexible. Hard work is undertaken when necessary, but not for its own sake. Precision and punctuality do not come naturally. I don't agree with that. Swedes are very punctual. It's actually quite rude to be more than a few minutes late. It's interesting without noticing your own culture. You don't actively think, that you have a cultural clock. But I'd say Australians are probably like 5 to 10 minutes late easily, and you wouldn't even notice. And I know for different cultures that is more or less, depending on how anxious they are. And I've had to set alarms and make sure that I get to meetings like a few minutes early, just to be on time. And okay, where else? Next we have long-term orientation. This dimension describes how every society has to maintain some links with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the future. So Sweden is pretty much smack bang in the middle. It doesn't have a clear preference on this dimension. So it's both long-term and short-term oriented, say. And finally, indulgence, which Sweden apparently scores high on. The degree, it's defined here as the degree to which small children are socialized. Without socialization, we do not become human. This dimension is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses based on the way they were raised. A relatively weak control is called indulgence, whereas relatively strong control is called restraint. So do we allow ourselves to express ourselves? I'm not sure if I completely agree with this either. This is a newer dimension since when I was introduced to Hofstede's cultural dimensions 20 years ago. It's quite interesting. I think in general Swedes do possess a positive attitude with regard to enjoying life and having fun. And they are allowed to express their individuality and realize their desires. So, okay. I guess these can all be interpreted in different ways too. Let's move on. I just wanted to also once again bring up Hofstede in relation to other countries. So I've compared in different slides Sweden versus India here. And the major things that stick out here for me are that the hierarchy in the power distance in India is a lot more. And I noticed this, again, going back to these stories about technical meetings. If somebody's manager is in that meeting, the manager usually does the talking. I noticed, even if the person that I normally speak to, the technician, is knowledgeable and basically has the technical competence. And in Sweden, everyone would just have an equal voice. Yeah. Individualism, I'm just saying. So Sweden is higher. What does that mean in the workplace? Maybe people are more likely to go against the grain and do something controversial or say something controversial within a certain extent. I don't know. I'm speculating here. Masculinity, that's quite clear. India is much higher on that value. So, I would say that also means that it's a patriarchal culture, more so than Sweden. Sure. Here's another slide, Sweden versus Bangladesh. There's a much higher difference in the power distance. Individualism, so there's a lot more groupthink in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is more masculine. They have higher uncertainty avoidance. And Ethiopia, there was only data available for the first 4 dimensions here, but once again, the pattern seems to be, and I think maybe because these are Middle Asian countries and Sweden is a Scandinavian country, so the pattern is across the board. Actually, sorry, Ethiopia is an Asian country, it's African. All of these countries seem to be a lot more masculine in general compared to Sweden. And why would we say this? Good question. Just thinking out loud, maybe Sweden has had to use women for survival in ways that other countries haven't, and that the major differentiator here is weather. Actually, it's a really extreme culture, cold, and maybe being strong. I don't know. See, I'm speculating here, so I just think that it's just interesting that it's a very, I would say, feminist culture in Sweden in general. Like, it's run. The Feminist Party, for example, has comparatively to other countries a lot of power. So I think this is interesting. Anyway, I'm going to keep moving on because I don't have the answers. I'm just bringing it to your attention, and I think it's important just to note here that there's always exceptions. So we can I disagreed with a few of these results here. We don't have to take this as gospel. It's a model that we can use to learn more theoretically. But if I'm to work with Swedes and Indians, as I do, I take each individual as they come. And not everyone's the same just because they come from the same country. So I think it's really important to also see the limitations in these. Let's move on. Strong women. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. Okay, why is it so important for women today to accept and develop the leadership role? I'd like you to just reflect on that. Maybe pause this presentation for a minute and come up with your reasoning behind this. Why? You can press pause and think about it. And even though I can't hear you, you can tell me your answer. Okay, I interviewed a friend of mine named Sophia for this, and one day we were watching our sons playing handball, and I thought she would be an interesting person to ask, as she's a technical manager in a male-dominated field. So let's hear from Sophia.
Hi, who are you?
My name is Sophia. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, and I work as a manager at TV4, national broadcaster. I'm head of about 80 video engineers in a male-dominated trade. Well, that's about it.
Yeah, great. And okay, a spontaneous question. Why is it so important for women to accept and develop the leadership role? Do you think?
It's not a question I've thought much about. I think maybe it's important. Men and women have different views and styles, and we contribute in different ways. And I think we complement each other.
Okay, great. Thanks for your perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got no idea if that worked. I will try to embed the clip in next time. But my take on this is that it can be summarized in one word: representation. Quite simply, women are 50% of the population, and they should be 50% of the leaders, plain and simple. If we feel that women do not have the kind of values and abilities to lead, then maybe we need to look at ourselves and the environment first. Many, many great men who made great discoveries in the past did so by leaving the burden of home and family life on the women. And I still see this in my friends today. Maybe even in myself. I wanted to change careers a few years ago. I started studying psychology, and I put my study on hold and career change on the back burner so we could live in Sweden. So maybe I'm a bad example in some ways, but it's basically compromise overall. But back to this original question, why it's so important for women to accept and develop the leadership role. It's because for younger people, you've got to see it to be it. Someone who sees other female leaders is much more likely to become a female leader themselves. So it's both representation and being a role model. Okay. Then I've taken a look at Pippi Longstocking, the strongest of all Swedish women. And Pippi is a character in a children's book created by Astrid Lindgren, the author on the left. She is now deceased. She passed away a few years ago, I think in late 2000 before 2010. And she's a national treasure and wrote over 50 children's books, which includes series such as Pippi, Emil, Carlsen, and she's won many literature prizes. She's the fourth most translated children's author worldwide, after Enid Blyton, Hans Christian Andersen, and the brothers Grimm. And this is huge, especially for a modern day Scandinavian author. And the cornerstone of her success, without a doubt, is Pippi Longstocking. So, 9 things we can learn from Pippi Longstocking. And I think this is also a bit of a cultural study, as well as a study into strong women, given that Pippi is the Swedish icon, loved by children and adults alike here. You can always be yourself. I think that's really important in Sweden too. Don't be afraid to make a mess sometimes. So she's not a perfectionist. Cleaning, well, I would just say in general, she makes a mess and quite often gets into messy situations, but she also cleans up after herself, which is important. Girls are just as strong as boys, even stronger. So if you know the Pippi stories, you'll know that she is really strong. Like, she's the strongest, physically strong. She can lift up a house. And that's not really questioned. Maybe because it's fiction, but I think there's some value to that it's the lead character is a girl. Going back to this mess and cleaning, we clean up after ourselves. It's not the be all and end all, but we can make it fun. And that's a common theme, that she makes mundane situations and tasks really fun. One should always defy society's norms. Wow. Actually, I don't know about working culture. Maybe understand what the rules are first before you break them, but that's one of her messages. How to deal with sour elders. There's a lot of older women characters trying to take her off to the orphanage. Pippi has she's a cartoon character, and she's loosely based on Astrid Lindgren's life, which was quite sad in many ways. But in this original story, there are some older characters trying to take her to an orphanage, and they're quite sour. I think that's a funny translation, but maybe apt. And I think, in the face of hardship, she always has a smile, Pippi, and can make light of tough situations and has a certain charm. And I think that charm is part of her appeal. Anything is possible. Even a child living by themselves with an endless supply of money. Well, it is fiction after all. Get creative with your talents. And I'll just say it. I'll leave it oh, that's funny. I've said 8 things I have in my list, but just creativity is really important with everyday life. It's part of everyday working life. It's part of us keeping our own motivation up, and it's the foundation for entrepreneurial spirit, and fostering this creativity is a way to keep ourselves young, fresh, and innovative. I'm listening at the moment to a creativity workshop by the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and I've forgotten her name. It's Liz something. Anyway, it's fantastic. And sometimes as a parent of young children, I'm just a little bit tired at the end of a working day. And it also just being creative and finding new ways to connect with my children or other people is a real plus. So I think Pippi is a role model in Sweden, and I think she's a great example of a strong woman. Sexual orientation and diversity in the workplace is the last section of this presentation, and I've started this part by looking at some definitions, because language is really important, and respecting somebody's rights, at the foundation of that is actually just understanding. And I think it's important, for example, to use the right pronoun, like he or she, at the request or as this, according to this person's wishes, whoever they are. I'm already moving into transgender parts, so I'll just stick to the slides. Sorry. But I just think my bottom line is that language is important. There are a lot of these terms that, I didn't have good explanations for. So I've looked them up in a dictionary and put them here for you. So LGBT plus. I usually say LGBTI. There's lots of different variations. I think the base is LGBT, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. The full acronym is LGBTQIA, which adds on queer, intersex, and asexual to the basic term, and the plus can even include other terms such as non-binary and pansexual. Binary. So I think this is Computer Science 101. But binary is where there's two choices. And in this context, it's a term that describes when two opposing things, black or white, man or woman, heterosexual, homosexual. So black or white means there's not really grey. And the use of binary often forecloses other ways of thinking about such categories. Heteronormative. That relates to systemic privilege of the social models of binary sex, so male and female, binary gender, and binary sexuality. That is the norm in heterosexuality. So that's basically making heterosexuals the norm. Transgender. It's an umbrella term including transsexual and transgender, used to describe a broad range of non-performing gender identities and or expressions. I'll let you read the rest for yourself. I'm getting sick of my own voice. Cisgender is a modern term, and I think it relates to heteronormative as well. A term used to describe when a person's gender identity matches the social expectations given their sex assigned at birth. And actually, maybe I should even just, I haven't got the terms here, but explain sex and gender, which is something that's brought up in Swedish education. So sex is basically, if we're looking in binary, what kind of phenotypes you have. So your actual representation in terms of genitals, like your sex assigned to according to your genitals. And this is also not black and white, but and gender is how you present to the world, which is usually the same as your sex, but not always. And so cisgender is when these two align. Okay. All right. Then we have gender diversity. It's about inclusion. So including people that have no gender, are bi-gender, or are not non-binary, neither woman nor man. Intersex is a term that relates to a range of physical traits and variations that lie between the ideals of male and female. So I was talking about sex versus gender, but actually intersex falls in between. And we later will see a advocate or an intersex advocate named Emily, who gives a presentation on, or just talking about her experiences and what it means. Homophobia, it is negativity, attitudes and behavior towards homosexual people. And last, erasure, which is where it describes an experience where transgender and gender diverse people's preferred gender is ignored or erased in society. And that's, for example, through constant misgendering or inappropriate healthcare. So this is coming back to where I was saying that language is really important. So if somebody transitions from one gender to the other and they want to use a different pronoun, this can be sometimes there's resistance from the family or from their social circle to do so, because they've always known this person as a male or a female, and now they take on a different identity, and can be a shock or hard to cope with. But it comes down to respecting that person's autonomy, and that's why I keep coming back to this point about language being important. So I should also just mention that just in general, like I'm just giving these statistics off the top of my head, but I would say that maybe people being LGBT in the workplace, or being in same-sex relationships is maybe, I'm taking a stab here, but maybe 10 to 15%. It's not huge. And then maybe people that are transgender or intersex, it's actually a lot less. It's probably maybe 1%, if that. So I'm spending time talking about something that has a relatively small part of the population, but it's a huge part of social justice, and these people have suffered discrimination and poor mental health and erasure and all kinds of trauma for many, throughout time. And I think people are just becoming aware of it, like in the last decade or so, but there's a long way to go. So this social justice aspect is why I think it's so important to take up these matters. Now, I have an exercise that might be hard if you're sitting by yourself listening to this, but if you could listen to the instructions and go and find someone to practice this with. Maybe you don't need to have them repeat with you, but if you could find someone and take a minute or so to describe another person, someone that you would spend, say, your weekend with, but without revealing their gender identity. So what do they look like? What do you like about them? Who are they? When did you last see them? What did you do? But don't use any gender pronouns. So like he or she, no name, nothing that could identify whether they are a male or female. And you can pause now if you want to try that. Okay, if you are able to run through that exercise, I would be interested in hearing from you. You can email me if you like what you observed and what you think the point was. I had a transgender friend of mine recommend this exercise, and there were two main points for me. Firstly, LGBT colleagues often have to go to great lengths to hide or deny their sexual orientation or gender identity, and that is actually a huge mental burden. This impacts a person's integrity and their self-worth, and it leads to an extraordinary amount of energy being redirected away from more positive areas of engagement, being able to connect with your colleagues, being able to express yourself as you are, and just being open and honest and transparent. So, for example, not being confident in joining in workplace conversations about your family life, your social activities, and your personal interests, this weighs on the minds of some LGBT colleagues, and they might fear possible discrimination. So not being able to answer the question straightforward or in an unhindered way, what did you do this weekend? Like, whereas the most of us would not think, I mean, we might censor some things, but we don't have to on a constant basis. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, that there's a psychological impact. And it's important that all people feel safe to express who they are authentically so that they can relax and share their everyday experiences and share themselves. Employees who feel valued and are treated with respect will contribute more, they'll be more creative in their roles and more motivated and focused. Workplace diversity. What does it mean? Why is it important? LGBT are more and more visible in society generally and in the workplace in particular. The laws in most countries, foremost in the EU, make it imperative that workplaces do not discriminate against LGBT employees in their policies and benefits. And I have read up a lot on non-discrimination law in Sweden, and there's actually legislation that says that a workplace not only must take this seriously, any breaches of a person's integrity in that way, but they also have to be, HR has to be proactive So that means also making a workplace inclusive from a proactive point of view. Or proactively, I should say, rather than just maybe waiting for something negative to happen, or it's about having a system in place to handle that. So next, how to be an employer of choice. So this is actually just a very generic point. This is not just specific to LGBT or diversity. An employer of choice is dynamic, invests in their people, has a safe and inclusive environment where people are encouraged to perform at their best. They have positive policies for everyone, and they are high performers in their field. Sorry, just before I move on to that, just one more thing about being a employer of choice. So progressive employers recognise that they need to draw on talent from all sections of the population and create a workplace culture that embraces diversity and equality. And the 4 key motivations for this representing diversity is that their reputation, that there's important sorry, I'm just thinking recruitment and retention in particular. It's easier to recruit and retain talented people, which is a competitive advantage. People are more productive, and risk mitigation is the final motivation for being an employer of choice, or like making an inclusive, diverse workplace. And just expanding on the point I made earlier about in Sweden the need to be a proactively inclusive workplace, there's also at the bottom line, or at the bottom of that, the need to comply with anti-discrimination laws and avoid the cost of litigation, because it usually comes back to money, the bottom line. And it's estimated, I found a figure that it costs on average $150,000 to manage a serious external complaint. And in the US, awarded damages in anti-discrimination cases exceed $1 million. And the legal fees to defend complex cases can exceed $100,000. Okay. So basically, what does this slide mean to me as a manager, an employee, a colleague? It means that I need to support and nurture my colleagues in a way that is positive for all, and that is underpinned by inclusivity. Okay, so I wanted to share the story of Emily Quinn with you. She's an intersex activist, and she's made a really interesting TED talk on the way we think about biological sex. So Emily Quinn is an intersex person, and for her this means that, and I've quoted this, so I've taken this from her talk, so I'm quite wary not to put words in other people's mouths, etc. But she said this about herself. While she has a perfectly normal-looking vagina, it's not a uterus and ovaries she has inside. She has an internal pair of testes. And that's going back to sex versus gender. So she has well, she's intersex, so it's not one or the other, but she presents as a female, I think, yeah. And here's some more words from Emily. And here is her TED Talk. I won't play it again, but you can go to this link. Google it if it doesn't come up. And she has this presentation as part of the TED series where she's talked about the way we think about biological sex is wrong. And I think this was a real learning experience for me, because I guess I didn't realize either what intersex really means. And this is quite common. When I say common, again, it's probably 1%, but when you think of 1% of the whole world's population, that's still a lot of people. And a lot of people in the workplace, a lot of people that are hopefully contributing members of society, and maybe by extension to the workplace. So understanding and creating a safe environment for them in the workplace and in general is really important. That's it for me. I am interested to hear if you have any more questions or answers. Maybe you have some answers. Yeah, I mean, maybe you have some reflections from the points I made about why women should be in the leadership role. And I'd also be interested to hear on your experiences in with the exercise in trying to describe somebody in gender neutral terms. That's it for me. Thank you for lending me your ear, and I hope I've expanded our collective world a little and highlighted why it's important to value inclusivity and celebrate our differences. Thank you.